Sir, thank you for speaking to PTI. Sir, what are key takeaways from this year's budget, sir?
So, very briefly, I would say that there are three, looking at it from an overall uh, economy, growth, jobs perspective, there are basically three themes which I see in most of these proposals which are there. One is reforms, what are called I call policy reforms. Many people call structural reforms. In that is included things like the reform of the income tax code, the new tax code, which the FMS said, which is will reduce the code by 50% and simplify it. Now, unfortunately, not many people have paid attention to that because it's still to be put in the parliament. And really, we cannot discuss the detail unless it's first put in parliament. Complementary to that was the tax reduction, which part of it is basically what economists would call inflation adjustment to get the real taxation and real wages in line. And then a host of other things related to non-financial regulations, etc. Basically reducing the compliance and regulatory burden, especially for MSMEs. So the regulatory thrust is very clear in the budget. The second thing I would say is which is necessary for whether you want to promote private investment, ease of doing business, etc., which have been the themes before also. Second part is I would put as education, skilling, innovation. And particularly, you have seen that over the last few years, there is a emphasis, greater and greater emphasis on job skills. Of course, the new economic policy, which I think came formally in 21, right, which is about 4 years ago, emphasized both FLN, the functional literacy and numeracy, which I call basic education and quality and of teaching and learning, and the job skills. So increasing emphasis on these because really jobs and skills are, in my view, two sides of the same coin, and especially in the formal sector, an improvement in skills is critical to higher real wages. And finally, the third element is the orientation towards labor-intensive exports, and again, an increasing focus on integrating with global supply chains. Why? Because over the last many decades, international trade has got increasingly focused in these MNC-led supply chains. So only the estimates are that only 1/3 of the international trade now occurs outside these chains. And MSMEs have been competing for this small portion. So they need to be integrated into the MNC supply chains, which requires them to raise their quality, skilling, etc. And so that labor-intensive manufacturing like food processing, textiles, etc. Has been mentioned. So I think that's an important reorientation, an important signal, and also a signal to these industries that the government, both at the center and hopefully in the states, will do help them integrate into the supply chains to increase exports, increase job growth, etc.
Sir, will this year's budget address the issue of stagnant real wages and slowdown in urban demand and also boost private consumption?
So, urban demand, of course, the rural demand had already started recovering, as I had predicted, I think, to you only a year ago, because of El Nino effects have gone. The urban, I think the key policy there is the adjustment of the income tax rates, which will definitely give a boost to urban consumption demand, and therefore bring so some people have kind of criticized this, but we have to remember that the consumption GDP ratio has not quite recovered to the pre-pandemic level. And in my view, this will also contribute to that long-term goal. That is a goal. We want to return to normalcy in this one area where it's actually the gap was the biggest. So that reverses, deals with both the Of course, urban has many other issues. Urban comes under the states have to think. So there are some incentives for distribution, improving urban electricity distribution, etc., which are also there. As far as you mentioned real wages, we know that the wages of casual workers have actually increased the fastest during AY18 to AY24 based on PLFS data. The real issue comes with the formal or not formal, they are called regular wage and salary jobs. And there the skilling, my analysis which I have been doing on for the last couple of years indicates that it is the skilling, on the job skilling, learning by doing, etc., which is more important. And again, the July budget and this budget has picked up that theme to improve the real wage growth in this salaried sector.
Sir, India is facing a serious job crisis. Do you think this year's budget will boost employment scenario in the country?
See, the data actually doesn't support this. So I'm not sure whether they are picking out pockets of things. Let me tell you the basic data. The basic data shows that the worker population ratio has increased, not steadily. There is always a lot of fluctuation in India, whether it's GDP growth or anything you take. But the trend is very clear. From again that same period of the PLFS data I use because of consistency. Otherwise we can argue endlessly whether some data is consistent, but this is one more or less consistent data set which shows that worker population growth is rising, which means the number of jobs is actually rising faster than the population. So there obviously can be pockets where jobs are not growing as fast, but the national level, the data is very clear.
Sir, India's projected growth rate is less than 7% in near term, next year also. So, do you think now it is feasible for India to achieve target of becoming a developed nation by 2047?
So, two things. One is, because of the big shock of the pandemic, one has to be careful. So, what I have been saying is, if we take the period from 2021 to 30, if we define the decade like that, it all depends on which years to take. But that 10-year period, I had said that the average growth rate would be 7% with a range of 0.5%. So, if you want to put it in simple terms, between 6.5 and 7.5. Now, we are by and large have been on target, and I would have asserted that we would be in the middle, but I think the downside risks have increased. Why is that? Everybody is aware what is happening in USA. Now we have even more data. Earlier people used to say that whether it's just a threat or it will actually happen. So those things are happening, much more, creating much more uncertainty for everybody. And I'm not really talking about the direct effects on us, but the indirect effects create uncertainty because you don't know what will happen in Europe. Indian companies export to Europe. You don't know what happening China, which has its own uncertainties, which have increased over the last 3 years because they keep investing, even though the capacity utilization is very low. So those sets of uncertainties have gone up. So there is, my forecast now is remains at 7%, but I would say there is a downside risk which we have to navigate over the next 6 months to a year.
Sir, are you worried about threats given by Donald Trump that he will impose tariff on India?
So I kind of indicated that, the latest statement which I have seen today, we need to focus a bit more on. He says that many companies, he said, and he deliberately says, and he explains that not all companies, he said that twice. He said many countries have taken advantage of USA, but not all. And he repeated it twice. So what he's saying is many countries, not all. I think we fall in that not all. We have been saying even in the end of the first term of President Trump that we are willing to sit down and see, remove if there are any things which each side considers unfair. let us deal with that. So given that history and that statement, I am not worried about the direct consequences. But as I said, the indirect uncertainty has gone up, and we have to take account of that.
Sir, the fiscal deficit fiscal deficit for FY25 has been pegged at 4.8% of GDP and 4.4% for FY26. Do you think these numbers are realistic numbers? I mean,
absolutely. One of the things which this finance minister and even the previous finance minister has shown is that the government takes the fiscal elements very seriously. And even during the pandemic, when many countries went overboard and people were asking, I was not in government, but I said that we have to be targeted in our expenditures, not look at the absolute stimulus. And that's what the government did. So I think we are well placed, and government takes the fiscal glide path which was put by the 15th Finance Commission seriously, and it will happen in my view.
sir, does the government has the firepower in case global situation turns adverse?
Well, in some ways, people again were saying that why is the fiscal deficit even below the target is what comment I heard. And you could say that is you're building up your reserves of firepower. So I think so.
So, do you think the fiscal discipline, lower debt creates room for rate cut by RBI?
See, what I have noticed is that, so one of the things which, according to my analysis, I think it's, if we look at our own history and others, it's generally a bad idea to tighten both fiscal and monetary policy together in a period of shocks, So one has to be a lot more targeted. That doesn't mean one does only fiscal or only monetary, but the coordination has to be carefully done. So there is some information to show that perhaps in the last first 2 quarters, both monetary and fiscal policy were too tight. So I think that balance has to be restored to what I would say is more appropriate.
Sir, privatization seems to have taken a back seat. There was no mention of disinvestment or privatization in the finance minister's budget speech. Is this a larger policy shift?
So I would say that both privatization and monetization have to be seen together, and perhaps at least from the budgets, the last 2 budgets, July, the focus seems to be shifting from privatization to monetization. Now, both things have to be done in a medium long-term framework, but I think phasing and timing is very important. And in case you didn't notice, in the budget there are clear instructions which the government leadership has given to these departments to bring up a list of monetization targets. So the issue of timing and phasing has to be not just economics, but also take account of political things. And I'm not saying this now, this is what my experience of the 1990s reform is. There is no point announcing 20 different privatization targets and then have a huge amount of political resistance to it. So timing and phasing has to take account of economic and political factors. And so based on that, I think the emphasis has shifted to monetization, where people can see clearly the link between monetizing certain targets and reinvesting the same proceeds in the same sector.
Sir, capex remained flat in this year's budget. Could FM had done better on capex?
Yeah. So as you know, for several years, capital expenditures have increased by 30% per year and have doubled over the last few years total. So I think, again, if I remember in one of our earlier interviews, I told you that the rate of increase cannot continue. Okay. Why? Because you need to invest in new types of capital. If you keep investing in the same sector, doing the same sort of thing, the rate of return on the marginal investment goes down. So I think it's a good time to take a pause, relook at where investment is needed, where there is enough, etc. And hopefully in the next few years, there will be more focus on other things. But there is some realignment going on. I think the emphasis on investment, for example, investment in R&D and innovation, I think is one shift, because when you have all this uncertainty and challenges outside, that is one of the way to meet these challenges, whether it's the climate change challenge or the uncertainty on trade front, etc. So I think the emphasis probably shifting to the R&D innovation side.
So the budget also talks about a revamp of the bilateral investment treaty framework. In what ways the new framework will be different from the existing one?
What the budget, the finance minister's speech says is that there will be a committee to review the bilateral trade agreements which we were trying to do, and the hint she gave was that there only 2 have been signed. So clearly some kind of, the implication is that we need to review this in the light of the FDI data, the need to attract supply chain, the M&E supply chain elements which I mentioned in the third factor, etc. The presumption is that those elements which others, these MNCs find unacceptable, but which also do not gain much for us, there's always a question of benefit cost ratio. So reevaluate these provisions. They should not be based on ideology. They should be based on the real benefits and costs, and so I presume that's what the review will do.
So the Indian rupee has weakened to all-time low. So should we allow the rupee to find its own value, or should the RBI intervene?
So when we talk about the rupee dollar rate, there are 2 elements to it. One is the appreciation of the US dollar to the index, and much of what you see in the total is now due to the US appreciation. So that is really not under our control and not something our policy has to worry about. The other element, of course, is depreciation with respect to index, and one way to measure that is compare it to other countries, because the general appreciation of the rupee affects everybody, right? So that is not something that we have any control or any other country has a control. So the latter part is actually not that great, but to the extent that there is an overvaluation. And I think here, as somebody suggested recently, we should look more closely at the Rupee Yuan rate. I think so. That's a good suggestion. Of course, we have to look broadly at our competitors also in this period of uncertainty. Again, I would link it to all the uncertainty. And within that context, yes, we should not, the market rate will be, people will reflect that in the market rate, and that should be allowed to prevail. Our policy traditionally has been that dampen any large volatility, but let the market find its level. Yes.
So my last question is, at the state level, we are seeing a huge resurgence of giveaways, which is also called freebies, in every election. So there is now competition among parties to bring in more and more programs of freebies. So is this concern for long-term development?
So again, you have to be careful about pre-election promises and what is happening. If you are talking about pre-election promises, perhaps that is true. So our, again, the finance minister mentioned the index for comparing. So our hope is, and we are trying to construct an index which shows investment, is that once this index is there, the states will compete in terms of attracting investment, because investment is what generates new jobs, okay, and again skilling, so the index is trying to see what are the elements, firstly, of what can be done to attract in various regulations, same things actually, whether their regulatory framework, which both the economic survey and the budget have given an indicator, but the action has to be in the state level. And as you and many others have pointed out, the investment, whether it's FDI or other, is going to a few states. So we must make sure that the others understand what is the way to attract this investment. We would like investment to go to every state, and hopefully this index will give them an indication of where they are behind or where they are weak, and correct it, and so correct this balance between just revenue expenditures and capital and particularly inviting private investment.